You're listening to The Greeks Gridiron. Now here's your host, Ethan Hristodoulou.
Welcome back, everybody, to The Greeks Gridiron. I am Ethan Hristodoulou, and a happy Monday to you all. Today, diving into the NFC South, we are ranking offenses in the division from worst to first. We've got two left. We have the NFC South and then the NFC North. We'll be officially done ranking teams on both offenses and defenses. Make sure you check out the rest of those if you have not already. And then we will get our eyes set on the beginning of the NFL's regular season. We're going to be doing game predictions every single week, picking winners and losers. We'll also be doing weekly power rankings, which I plan on changing up this year to be a little bit different than the format I've been doing the last few years. We've got a lot to get into once the NFL's regular season gets going, so I hope you all are subscribed and stick around so you don't miss out. But we are diving into the NFC South today. Offenses, from worst to first. Let me know in the comment section down below. How would you rank this division? Who's got the best offense? Who's got the worst offense? And everyone in between. At the number 4 spot, and I hate to feel like, I almost feel like I'm ragging on them, but I'm not. It's just a situation that they're currently in right now. Sitting at number 4, I have the Carolina Panthers, and they've been at the bottom of just about what feels like everything I've done that pertains to them so far this offseason, and honestly for a while now. And I'm hoping that this is the year things start to trend in the right direction. Not going to hold my breath on that, but I do feel like we should be getting a better Carolina Panthers product than what we got last season. Should be. Emphasis on the should there. But of course, new offensive coordinator, new head coach over here as Brad Idzik is going to be taking over the offensive coordinator spot here under head coach Dave Canellis, looking to help Bryce Young reach that first round pick number 1 potential he was selected at a couple of seasons ago. Now, when I look at Carolina, I will say this. The team looks like it's better than what it was last year. They've made several moves to improve a handful of different areas, both the offensive line and the wide receiver room, and it should not be very difficult for Carolina to be better this year than they were last year. They were barely averaging 14 points per game. They averaged a league worst 4.1 yards per play. They averaged a league low 161 passing yards per game. There is not a lot that needs to go right for this offense to be better than what it was last season. And I do think with what they did, we should see an improvement in a handful of departments here, and I'm really looking forward to this kind of new era in Carolina with this new coaching staff. $153 million was spent on bringing in both guards Robert Hunt and Damian Lewis to shore up the interior of the offensive line. These are two of the top offensive guards that were available this offseason, and I'm really hoping that this does fix some things along the interior of the O-line in Carolina that'll not only allow Bryce Young more time to throw the football if he needs it, but also to help open things up in the running game, which was kind of like the lone bright spot for this team last year. You also go into the draft, round number 1, Xavier Legette. You go and grab him from South Carolina, who last season had 71 catches, 1,200 yards, 17.7 yards per reception. Ludicrous number there. 7 touchdowns to go along with that all. Very strong campaign last season out of South Carolina. You're hoping he can evolve into the number 1 wide receiver target. You, of course, went and traded for wide receiver Deontay Johnson as well from Pittsburgh, who at his peak and his very best, when you look at like his 2021 season, was a guy that was good for 100 catches, 1,100 yards, 8 touchdowns. And you're also pairing them with the other skill guys you already have there. And a running back with, you of course have Chuba Hubbard, and kind of hoping that maybe Miles Sanders can be a little bit better than what we got from him last season. So there is definitely a lot to look at with this offense and go, all right, more pieces added, more threatening pieces at that. You're hoping that opens things up for maybe some of the people that struggled last season, or just adds on to what you did find success with last season. You, of course, have Adam Thielen there as well, and it looks like from the way depth charts have been organized, he's going to be manning the slot as Legette and Johnson are your outside wide receivers, so that's all fine and dandy. You also have a 4th-round tight end selection here in Jatavian Sanders, someone who I'm kind of interested in seeing what he does coming from Texas here. The last couple of seasons he played played there. He racked up altogether 99 receptions, about 1,300 yards, 7 touchdowns here. More of a wild card, not somebody that I expect to light the Panthers offense on fire, but definitely someone who I think could maybe find himself competing for snaps early on, because it's not like you're sitting here with one of the most versatile and threatening tight end ones in the NFL right now. So there is a lot to look at with this offense and go, all right, this is a group that at the very least on paper has got to be better than what they were last year. Has got to be, right? So I'm anticipating improvement from this team. And again, you're hoping that guys like Miles Sanders that you brought in last year can maybe benefit from all these other additions to help open things up a little bit more here. All eyes, though, will be on Dave Canales, Brad Isaac, and what they do schematically to try to open things up and help Bryce Young reach his first-round potential that he was selected at last NFL draft. And you're hoping that they can maximize the talent of the guys that they've brought in here. I think offensive line is going to be the biggest thing to really keep an eye on here. Again, $150 million being invested in just 2 guys alone to help shore things up on the interior there is going to be hopefully huge for this offense altogether, and I'm really hoping for a much better outcome for the Panthers. I'm ready to see Carolina get back into the swing of things, get back to being a little bit more competitive, and bringing a little more heat into what is funny enough, because there really typically isn't consecutive division winners in the NFC South outside of Tampa Bay doing the impossible, what felt like this past season. Oddly competitive within the division, but not so much outside the division, NFC South. So I'm hoping Carolina can bring a little bit of heat back into this division here. Now, moving into number 3, this is where I think there is a lot of conversation to be had, and I'm sure a lot of people would disagree. And I feel like the way I look at this division right now, you have a team at number 4, you have number 3 and number 2, and then I think based off of expectations, you have a clear number 1. Whether you agree or disagree with that, I'll let you decide in the comments. But at number 3, after a lot of consideration here, and I'm sure I'm going to hear it, and I'm bracing myself for it, but I'm ready for it. At number 3, I'm looking at the New Orleans Saints here. Now, of course, you're looking at a new offensive coordinator in New Orleans. Clint Kubiak's coming in here. It's going to be his first season with the team, joining from San Francisco. He was their passing game coordinator. Now, you look at the New Orleans Saints last season. This is a top 10 team in terms of points per game last year. This is one of the better offenses when it came to protecting the football overall. They were in the bottom 10 in terms of total turnovers. Excellent place to be in. One of the few offensive statistics you actually want to be in the bottom of. But I do have a little bit of concern with the left side of the offensive line. A lot of reworking done altogether with the depth of the offensive line as well overall. And then on top of that, Alvin Kamara is dealing with a back injury right now, and on top of that, I hate to say this because I don't like to really speak negatively on people, but I have finally kind of gotten myself off of the Derek Carr train. I have been a long-time Derek Carr guy. I have been rooting for him since he's come into the league. I remember his near MVP season before he went down with injury right before the Raiders were going into the playoffs. So, I've always been kind of a Derek Carr guy and been rooting for him, and I feel like he hasn't necessarily been put in the best situation in some seasons here, but he has had some good situations and hasn't quite lived up to the level that I was hoping he would get himself to. And I think I'm kind of out on the Derek Carr situation in New Orleans. I think he was solid last season? Absolutely. His touchdown to interception ratio, definitely a good number to be at there. I believe it was, 25 touchdowns to 8 picks, something like that, along those lines. I mean, he did a good job overall, but there are moments in time where when I am watching a football game and you have just got to have it from Derek Carr, and I feel like you do not get it from him. So that's kind of where I'm standing right now. So this is not really more about me thinking that the Saints are going to flat out regress, or that they're just not nearly as good as maybe people think they are. This is more about me liking the other 2 teams that are ahead of them just a little bit more than anything else. That's kind of where I stand on that. But I do like what New Orleans did this past offseason. They've been cap strapped for what feels like the last 5 years now, where every offseason they go into, they're like $100 million or at least close to it over the cap, and they just kind of have to let people go and watch their roster bleed. until they restructure contracts until they eventually get themselves in a position where they can maybe bring in a guy or two, and it's typically nothing more than depth signings at that, with maybe like a splashy guy, and this year being wide receiver Cedric Wilson as like your splashiest addition on the offense, who hasn't really quite lived up to that last 2021 season he had in Dallas with the hype he had going into Miami. Just never really found a role there, albeit there's a lot of wide receiver talent over there in Miami, so maybe that's why. On top of that, you add a left guard in Lucas Patrick, who was cast off from Chicago. And again, he's going to be starting at the left guard spot alongside a rookie in left tackle, Talise Fuaga, who I will say I'm excited to see how he fares in New Orleans. Daniel Jeremiah, a guy I really respect. I'm sure a lot of people do, but I love listening to him talk about his draft prospect, or what his thoughts on draft prospects. He seems to be very high on Talise Fuaga. So you have a new left guard and a guy that was let go by Chicago. And on top of that, you have a rookie starting at left tackle as well. There's obviously never really a guarantee for how the rookies work out, but he is a first-round pick starting at that spot here. So a little bit of concern for the blind side of Derek Carr. And again, a lot of changing along just the offensive line depth as a whole here. I feel like New Orleans themselves are not super certain as to what this offensive line is going to look like. I feel good about the right side, but you also have the issue of Ryan Ramczyk, who at this point, it feels like his career might be over. That's also something that's going to be an issue for this offensive line as well. So, like, how sure are you really about the right side on top of that? But there's a lot of concern to be had about the O-line. The way I look at New Orleans right now, they were a competitive offense last year. Again, they finished in the top 10 in terms of points per game. They're a competitive team year in and year out. It's just one of those things that with New Orleans, you know they're going to come and play hard football, and you're going to get a good effort out of them year in and year out. Even when they're not having their best seasons, they're typically battling for a playoff spot within their division at the very worst. It never really feels like New Orleans is flat out dead. At least that's how it's been the last handful of seasons that I've been watching. But I will say that I think with the injury to Alvin Kamara going on right now and him missing all this time, and again, I'm just a little bit uncertain about Derek Carr with my concerns on the offensive line, and I would take the overall skill groups of Tampa Bay and Atlanta before I would take New Orleans right now. Big fan of Chris Olave, respect the hell out of what he does there, but outside of Chris Olave, you have Rashid Shaheed, right? Yes, Rashid Shaheed. You have A.T. Perry, Bub Memes, 5th-round wide receiver pick, Equinemius St. Brown, and then Cedric Wilson Jr. at the wide receiver group altogether. The tight end room, Juwan Johnson's on the pup right now. There's just a lot of worries I have with New Orleans. I'm not going to sit here and flat out say they're regressing, but I do feel like I like Tampa Bay and the Atlanta Falcons just a little bit more than I do the New Orleans Saints right now. Moving into the number 2 spot, and like I said, there's a lot of conversation to be had about this. I really do kind of lump 2 and 3 together. I feel like who you like more, what quarterback you trust in more, what skill groups you like more. You could probably flip-flop these two teams here, but I am leaning at number 2 with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers here. Now, with Tampa Bay, you have a new offensive coordinator in Liam Cohen coming in. He was the University of Kentucky's offensive coordinator last year. He was the Rams OC the year prior to that. Tampa Bay finally has a long-term answer beyond Tom Brady. Now, with Baker Mayfield coming in at quarterback, didn't really get an offseason with them last year, so I'm really excited to kind of see what exactly Baker Mayfield can do with a full off season. It's unfortunate that it's another new offensive coordinator again, because this is one of those things where Baker Mayfield, at this point, should probably be used to it, because he's gone through a rotating door of offensive coordinators his whole career. But I trust in Baker Mayfield. I've always thought he's a gamer. I really feel like the Browns did not give him a fair shake, and honestly kind of BS'd him out of his role just to go after Deshaun Watson, who has not really turned into much for them since bringing him in here. And they basically put it against him for playing injured. So I'm really high on Baker Mayfield. I always have been. I think he's a gamer, and I think that he's definitely matured now during these later 20s in his career. So I'm excited to see what he can do with such a talented skill group at wide receiver. Liam Cohen, I'll be interested in seeing what his scheme looks like for this offense here, but there is some groundwork to be done and made up here, because this was it was the worst rushing offense last season. They finished the year averaging just under 89 yards per game on the ground, which was dead last in the NFL. They finished 20th in points per game, but I'm looking for an ability to actually run the football more consistently this year, coupled with the fact that now Baker Mayfield's been here for a season. He's gotten an off season within the program as well. They actually know he's going to be their starting quarterback going into the season. And I think all of that is going to benefit Tampa Bay a lot, and it's going to allow them to make a push into potentially winning this division again this year, or at least challenging the Atlanta Falcons in doing so. When you look at what they did as far as free agency is concerned, not a ton of changes here. They did go get Ben Bredesen from New York. He's going to be starting at the left guard spot here, and I don't necessarily know how I feel about that signing. That's one of those things that it kind of remains to be seen. Maybe a change of scenery for him will be good, because we all know just how poor the offensive line was in New York last season. A lot of just offensive line depth as far as free agency is concerned, though, for them. You brought in wide receiver Sterling Shepard as well, who this guy he's hurt every single year, so I don't really know how he keeps catching on to places, but he does. And then the NFL draft is where you see a larger majority of the changes, or at least additions to this offense here. In round one, you finally get your Ryan Jensen replacement here in your center, Graham Barton, who played center, then left tackle at Duke, but he's now slated to start at the center spot. They're moving him back there as well. He looked really good his first season at Duke when he did play center here, and they opted to move him to left tackle. I'm excited to see how he does on the interior of the O-line there. You have a wide receiver in Jalen McMillan, who right now, when you look at the depth chart right now, looks like he's slated to start opposite of Mike Evans. You're going to have Chris Godwin in the slot here. In 2022, you're looking at nearly 80 catches, 1,100 yards, 9 touchdowns here. He doesn't have to be the focal point of the offense. Again, Mike Evans is good for, 1,000 yards every single season here. You also have Chris Godwin, so he's like the number 3, even though he's technically like the number 2, because Godwin's the slot, but like he is the number 3 in the pecking order of Evans, Godwin, and then him, so he doesn't have to be the star, but he's learning from 2 really good wide receivers, and I'm really excited to see how he fits in there and the kind of connection that he and Baker Mayfield can put together. You also have a 4th-round running back selection in Bucky Irvin, who in the last couple of seasons at Oregon racked up nearly 1,900 yards. He had 21 touchdowns. This is a guy who has a lot of production over the last couple of seasons in an Oregon offense that was very top flight. And then a couple of other selections later in the draft as well. Whether they even make the roster or not, we'll kind of just see. But you have tight end Devin Culp in the 7th round, 6th round's right guard Elijah Klein. I look at this team, and my only thought really is, if they can even just be somewhat average at running the football this year, you can get a more balanced attack. Things will open up even more for the passing game, and Baker Mayfield will continue to be able to deal to a trio of wide receivers that I'm really excited to see him throw to. You also have tight end Cade Otton, who's getting the opportunity to be the starter, looks like, heading into the season here. There's a lot of good talent for Baker Mayfield to work with. I'm banking on the fact that Mayfield now gets an offseason in the Buccaneers program. He's been there. They know he's the guy. They have committed to him. They've given him the money that I think he rightfully deserves, and on a really good deal at that, to allow them to really maximize the talent put around him, not only on offense, but on the defensive side of the ball as well. This is a team that I'm really looking forward to. A lot of it boils down to Liam Cohen and just what he can do with this offense, and if he can get that running game going. And if he can do that, I think Tampa Bay's offense is going to be A-OK in the 2024 season and should be pretty good within this division. And then, of course, last but certainly not least, at the number 1 spot, the only team that's left, we're looking at the Atlanta Falcons. Now, Zach Robinson's coming in. He is the new offensive coordinator. Of course, Raheem Morris is the new head coach here. Now, Zach Robinson has spent the last 5 seasons in L.A. with the Rams. He has been working with the quarterbacks, and then he was the passing game coordinator for a little bit here. He has spent a lot of time with Sean McVay, and I know a lot of people are probably looking at this going, what is Zach Robinson going to do with this offense here in Atlanta? All these weapons and whatnot. There is going to be a lot of pressure on him. I feel like when you're coming from Sean McVay's tree and you've worked with Sean McVay, there's going to be a lot of pressure put onto you, and I'm sure he's anticipating that and well aware of it, and I'm very curious to see what he does here. I look at Atlanta, and they have all the makings of a contender right now when you look at the offensive side of the ball and even the defensive side of the ball, but we're just focusing offenses here. Atlanta is a contender, and the way you went out, you went and signed a quarterback in Kirk Cousins on a 4-year deal for the amount of money that you did. Anything but the best offense in the NFC South is a complete failure for this Falcons team this season. I'm going to throw that pressure onto them here. You have all the talent. You have a guy in Kyle Pitts who is just uber athletic, awesome size, awesome athleticism, like everything you could possibly ask for in a receiving type of tight end. You have Drake London, of course, who I think has the makings of being a number one wide receiver. You have Bijan Robinson, who is one of the more impressive athletes at the running back position here, who for whatever reason felt like Arthur Smith in that offense last year just did not want to give him the football for a while. I remember that whole conundrum going on as well. Also, you have Darnell Mooney coming in, who I know some people think for whatever reason he's like an overrated guy. He had that one good season. Well, I think being the number 2 to a guy like Drake London, and maybe even a number 3 to someone like Kyle Pitts, if Kirk Cousins really gets into getting the football to those two guys, could be a great compliment to them. There is a lot to like here. You also have a really good offensive line when they are healthy. The depth is something that I'm slightly concerned about, but healthy, I do like their offensive line in Atlanta. This is a team that if it does not have the best offense in the division this season, you have a major problem. You have a major problem. I don't care if Kirk Cousins is coming off this Achilles injury or not. It's 2024. These types of injuries are not as damning as they used to be 20 years ago. And the style that Kirk Cousins plays, he is a pocket quarterback. He's not running for yards every single game. He sits back and he dissects defenses and he slices and dices. That's what he does. So I'm not too worried about Kirk Cousins at all. It'll maybe be a little bit before he truly gets comfortable back in the pocket, but I'm expecting at worst maybe a little bit of a slow start the first few weeks and then kind of ramping up, and this offense should be clicking no further than like week 4. This should be a unit that is able to get after just about every defense they go against in the NFL with the amount of talent you have right now. And again, you look at Kirk Cousins coming in, Darnell Mooney, Ray McCloud, he's coming in for the slot wide receiver role here. I'll also be curious kind of how the wide receiver room kind of works itself out here, because yes, Ray McCloud comes in and he's at least listed currently as a starting slot guy, but behind him you have, I believe it is Darrell Hodge, who was brought in from Detroit. And then you also have Chris Blair and Casey Washington, 2 other guys that are on the depth chart further down, some younger guys as well. I'm curious to see just kind of how snaps get divvied up. Does Ray hang on to that slot wide receiver role? Does anyone else maybe potentially usurp him? How do they use Bijan Robinson? Does he maybe find himself in some slot roles? Like, this is a guy who can catch out of the backfield, but I also think you could line him up at receiver in certain places and have him catch the football. Like, there is so much you can do with this offense, because you don't get athletes the size of Kyle Pitts and Drake London. On top of that, you don't just have an athlete on every single team that can not only run the football but catch the football the way Bijan Robinson can. There is so much that this team can do. And again, the offensive line is a really good unit when they're healthy. Slightly concerned about the depth. If ATL is not a top offense in the NFC, it's kind of a failure. Like, they're battling, I would say at worst, for top 5 offense in the NFC. At minimum, in terms of entirety of the NFL, this needs to be like a top 10 offense. This is a lot of pressure to just be throwing on. I know I'm some guy on YouTube, but the reality of the amount of talent that you have here in Atlanta, coupled with now bringing in a quarterback in Kirk Cousins, who, and I know a lot of people don't respect Kirk Cousins for whatever the reason is. They always point to his record as a starting quarterback, but seem to forget he played on Washington for 6 years as a starter. And we all know the crap show that Washington has been, at least since I have been watching football since like the early 2000s. So it's not like Washington has really been some place that you want to spend your career in, especially as a quarterback. But like, coupled with the fact that during his time in Minnesota, don't get me wrong, but there have been some not so great defenses not supporting that team for the duration that Kirk Cousins was over there in Minnesota as well. So I'm not going to sit here and take all the blame off Kirk Cousins. He has definitely not been perfect, but he has competed at a high level. He's competed as a top 10 quarterback in multiple instances and seasons in his career. You have a team that is set for the playoffs. This is a playoff team, especially with the additions that they just made the last few weeks. I mean, at this point, Atlanta potentially has, on paper, the best defense and offense in the division now. So if ATL is anything but a top 5 offense in the NFC, a top 10 offense in the NFL as a whole, and not the best offense in the NFC South, you're kind of looking at a flat-out failure, in my opinion, by Atlanta. That's just kind of where I stand. that is my TED Talk. Thank you for joining. But those are my thoughts. Those are my opinions. I appreciate it if you made it all the way to the very end of the video. As always, thank you all for watching. I'll see you all next time. Have a good one.